Hello and welcome to another episode of Foundation with Steve Teed. I am your host and servant, Steve Teed. Always asking you that very important question: what are you building your life on? What is it that you use to verify what's right and wrong? Use to give you purpose. Use to give you meaning. Because there's a lot of things out there that are vying for your attention. It basically comes down to, what is your worldview? How is it you make those decisions? Answer those questions in life. And here on this show, that's really what it's all about. I help you to determine that the best foundation for your life, as I preach, as I proclaim, is the truth of Jesus Christ and His Word. And in this show, what we do is we look at various news articles, various teachings, and things like that, and show how doing it God's way, building your life on the foundation of Jesus Christ, is actually the best way. So let's cut back the music. I'll tell you where we're going to go today. All right, on today's episode, we're going to really kind of look at a question of who are you following? Who are you following? And not only who are you following, but are you really willing to follow them? And we're going to do that by looking at a couple of news stories. I got three lined up here, but if we have time, I'll do all three. I'll try not to go over time. I did that 1 month, and I actually went over my limit for uploading without having to pay more. That's why one episode a couple of weeks back was a little bit later in releasing, just to make that. But that happens. We'll see what we do here. We'll see if we can get it all in. But we're going to start with an article that, as a parent, I'm going to say, as a parent, it's a little more disturbing. And by disturbing, I don't mean for disturbing as in video disturbing or scary disturbing. I mean the thought process that's there. The thought process. And something that's with it that we got to, that can scare a parent, but can put them on guard. And that's a good thing. That's really what it's about. And so we're going to look at a news story, but it does have to do with who are you following. And then we're going to go see a couple of stories that are about the cost of following. The cost of following Christ. Are we really willing to follow Jesus even at the cost? Because I think sometimes we develop into the idea that if I follow Jesus, everything's going to be hunky-dory. Everything's going to be great. Everything's going to be amazing. And that's simply not true. Now, I'm not talking about just the idea of like the health and wealth gospel, where if you follow Jesus, you're going to be healthy, wealthy, and you're going to live long, and you're going to prosper in all things. You're going to have the Vulcan way of life of live long and prosper. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the fact that if you follow Jesus, you're going to find yourself at odds with the world. If you truly follow Jesus, you're going to find yourself at odds with the world. I don't just mean the definition of the world's idea of, it's all about love. No, I'm talking about if you truly follow Christ and you put Him first, we'll see how that'll put you at odds. So that's where we're going to go. And as I said, it's just a little warning on the first story. Maybe a little bit disturbing, but for parents or grandparents and caregivers, it's going to be more disturbing. But I'm hoping it's one that we take to heart and we really stop and we look, you know what? This is something that we need to pay attention to. So let's kind of get into it. So let's jump right in. Here we go. All right, our first one, I kind of call it a TikTok warning, but here it is. TikTok's blackout challenge linked to deaths of 20 children in 18 months, report says. And the report suggests that 15 victims of the challenge were aged 12 or younger. 12 or younger. This is one that I said, as a parent, that's really kind of disturbed me a bit. As I read it and as I studied it, because of the very nature of it, and the fact that kids these days are so connected to their phones, so connected to videos and things like that, and I admit it is easier as a parent sometimes just to, when you need to cook, when you need to do something, clean something, to allow your kids to play on a device and to watch some things. And you think they're safe. But a lot of times these things that are coming up, and this has surfaced quite a bit, are from TikTok challenges. If you're not familiar with TikTok, TikTok is a place where there's a whole bunch of, like, for the most part, short videos. It's from a Chinese company originally, and the controversy over TikTok back in the day was, are the Chinese people and the Chinese government using it to spy on American and North American citizens, grabbing their information and things like that. But TikTok, for the most part, it's a place where it's really all about short videos, and they do challenges and fun things like that. I remember even one time my niece said, "Are you on TikTok?" I said, "No." So you go ahead, do the dances and things like that. No, that wasn't a thing for me. I don't dance. I have no rhythm whatsoever. I am not so much musically inclined. I can hear music. I can hear when something's right or not, but to reproduce it, not a chance. But so it's shorts. Now, if you've been on YouTube, you got YouTube shorts that are very similar to that kind of thing. And I've seen them on Facebook too, where they're basically like little short videos. Some of them are humorous, but some of them are very, very dangerous. And you're probably familiar with certain TikTok challenges. And some of them are like, do this dance challenge. I remember one, it was like a car dance challenge where they literally put the car in gear. They have their phone sitting on the other seat. They'd get out of the car and dance alongside the car. Now, it's dangerous, but people were doing it. But let's look at this one. Let's look at this article a little bit. The fatal blackout challenge on TikTok has reportedly been linked to the deaths of at least 20 children in the past 18 months. The popular challenge on the social media platform encourages people to choke themselves with household items until they become unconscious, and film the adrenaline rush once they regain consciousness. Think about that. This is quite literally, you're to strangle yourself until you pass out. But you're to strangle yourself with an item, with some kind of item. Be it a belt, be it a scarf, be it an extension cord, be it whatever. And you do that until you pass out, and then you film yourself with the adrenaline rush when you come to. Yeah, that's not going to go bad. Well, obviously it will. It says over 20 in the past 18 months that they know of. And at least 15 of those children who died while filming the challenge were aged 12 and younger, according to the data compiled by the Bloomberg Business Week. 5 of the victims were between the age of 13 and 14. So think about that. These are all 14-year-olds and younger. 14-year-olds and younger. Why? Because typically the older of these would say, you know what, this is dumb, don't do it, it's dangerous. But the younger generation is very, very impressionable. Trust me, they are. It says the Blackout Challenge is a modern incarnation of choking dares that has been around for years, but have been made accessible to children through social media platforms. The choking game killed 82 minors when it first appeared in 2008, according to the data from the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. TikTok and its parent company ByteDance has been sued by parents who claim their children died as a result of the fatal challenge. In February 2021, pay attention, a 9-year-old girl in Milwaukee, Wisconsin choked to death after wrapping a household item around her neck while allegedly trying to perform the Blackout Challenge, the report said. Antonio Silicamaro, a 10-year-old girl in Palermo, Italy, was found hanging. Her parents said she died while playing an extreme game on TikTok. And here's the thing. They go to sue TikTok, and TikTok has been found non-liable because of a law that protects them from the content that's on their platform, is what it was. And so go back to this girl. When a group from Trust and Safety reviewed every video clip the girl had watched, it found that she, like many other children her age, claimed that she was older than 13 when she created a TikTok account. In a relief for TikTok, the team found no evidence of the app's algorithm recommended the challenge to Antonio. After Antonella's death in 2021, TikTok agreed to re-verify the ages of the country's 12.5 million users. That just makes of Italy. That didn't do anything else. However, the deaths continued. In December 2021, Nyla Anderson, 10, died after constricting her breathing at home in a Philadelphia suburb. Her mother found cell phone videos of the girl and her cousin playing an asphyxiation game. See, here's the problem. This is danger. Like I said, as a parent, this is absolutely frightening to me. It is. This is absolutely frightening to me. And here's the thing. Where are they getting this idea? By following social media. They're getting it on social media. They're getting it on TikTok. They're saying, hey, look, this is fun. Videotape yourself doing it. And it's this need, one, to become famous, to become popular. And the other one is they're mimicking it. And at the same time, it's like a mixed message for parents saying you got to really watch your kids, but parents are also being told that you've got to give your kids privacy. You got to give them privacy. Look, I'm going to tell you right now, as a parent, absolutely not, you don't. You don't have to give them privacy at this age. Not a chance. Not a chance. There's too much risks out there. There really is. There's predators online. There's things like this online. They don't get any privacy. I'm sorry. I don't make any qualms about that. In my house, my kids get no privacy when it comes to tablets. I go through histories. I look to see what they're doing. I look to pay attention. Why? Because children their minds aren't capable of understanding this. Their minds aren't capable of understanding the danger of this. They just see a video. They want to copy it. They want to mimic it. They want to do what it does. It looks fun. They say, I want to get subscribers. I want to get followers. I want people to like it. Look, I've got a son who made videos. And he would sit there and he'd be like, okay, oh, I got a like. Oh, I got a view. Oh, I got a comment. He would go and comment on everybody's videos just to see them to re-comment. And he's in this age group. This is the danger. I said, this is absolutely scary. As a parent, this one actually frightens me. Why? Because our kids are following what they see. And that should be a warning for parents. This should be a warning when it comes to technology. How many things out there saying that parents, you've got to watch it. There's dangers in the technology. The dangers of allowing kids to have access to technology too early. And things like that. And I'm talking about watching videos, making videos. This is the problem. They're seeing it. They're copying it. And what I have noticed, and this is the older kids get, a lot of them, they realize, I've heard them say, well, TikTok's toxic. I canceled my TikTok. And I'm like, that's great. And I'm going to be honest, I never let my kids download TikTok at all. Not a chance. Not going to happen. But look at the danger. They're just following what they see. They're following it. They see it. It looks good. They follow it. They copy it. And they do it. That's the problem. So, as I said, this one is a warning, but it's still the question is, what are we following? And I'm going to tell you a practice that my wife and I have taken up. And it's like, well, and we had it before, but we were trying to make time to do it. It's now when we go grocery shopping. A lot of times, even doing just grocery shopping, we go in the evenings. We try not to do it in the day. And even when we go in the evenings, we take one of our children with us. And I'll take my older one. Usually once a week he goes out with me, or once every 2 weeks. We go out. Now, we don't just do grocery shopping. We do a little bit other. We get some food and stuff. But what's the purpose? To spend time with him, to see what he's watching, see what he's doing, see how he's going. But also to teach him and how to shop, teach him what to buy for, what to look for, how to do all this stuff. That's the purpose behind it. Because if we don't have our kids with us, and we are relying so much on technology and so much on things such as YouTube, TikToks, social media, things like that, and they're spending so much time on it, they're watching all these things, they're going to learn from it. And instead of following a parent who hopefully is following Jesus, they're going to follow these examples. And a lot of times, it is to fatal extents. It really is. It is to absolute fatality. And so, as I said, that story is disturbing a little bit for a parent. It should disturb us. But then we get asked the question, what are we going to do about it? Are we going to stand up and say, you know what, I'm going to look after my kids the way Jesus wants me to? You know, I'm going to step in. I'm not going to say you can have all this technology. You cannot spend all your time on social media. Let's go play. Let's go interact. Let's go do something. And I'll say just spend time with the children. And that's where we're going to go. All right, I'm going to leave that one alone a little bit here. I want to go on to the our next story. All right, our next one, as I told you, we're going to be dealing here with the cost of following. So the first one really is about what are we following, with a parental warning in there. But what are we following? Are we gonna pay the cost? Will we pay the cost? Now, a lot of times when people say following Jesus, the message that can get preached from the pulpit and the message that we can receive a lot of times is, you just follow Jesus and he's going to bless you. Now, I don't disagree with that. I agree that Jesus is going to bless us. He's going to bless us with every blessing in the heavenly places. But the thing is the blessings that are often getting portrayed are blessings here on earth. He's going to increase your wealth, increase your territory, that kind of thing. That's where you had like the book a couple of years ago, the prayer of Jabez, which was all about a short prayer found in First Chronicles, where it's just like, Lord, bless me and increase my territory. And it said the Lord did this. Just copy that prayer, and you're gonna have this. You're gonna do this, and you're gonna be blessed, and you're gonna have a larger empire, that kind of thing. But in actuality, when we follow Jesus, we're going to be at odds with this world. And are we willing to actually do that? Where the blessings that we get are not physical blessings, but when we find out, you know what, I become a child of the King. I am forgiven. I get the blessing of the inheritance of the eternal kingdom of Christ. I get the victory over the enemy because of Christ. These are all blessings. And then we start to look, and even when David wrote about the blessings, when he wrote about it, the first thing he said was, bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me. Forget not his benefits. And the very first thing that he talks about is, my iniquities have been forgiven. My sins have been removed as far as the east is from the west. That's what he talks about. That's what the blessings are following Christ. And if we seek to follow Christ, Paul writes to Timothy, any who seek to live godly in Christ Jesus will suffer persecution. That's the cost. Now, let me give you an example here. Here's one. Restaurant refuses service to Christian group, citing staff dignity. Now, you can get the story in a variety of places here. I'm going to the Washington Post. I could go to Christian Post. I can go to Daily Wire. But I'm going to go to the Washington Post here. But an actual restaurant refuses to service to Christian group, citing staff dignity. Now, why did I go here? Because it's a little more left-leaning. That's the purpose of it. And I wanted that left-leaning idea bias a little bit. So let's look in the article. Why is it that they actually refused it? Citing staff dignity. Here we go. All right. A restaurant in Richmond, Virginia, last week canceled a reservation for a private event being held by a conservative Christian organization, citing the group's opposition to same-sex marriage and abortion rights. Okay. That's what it was for. Look, here you go. Here's their actual stance. We have always refused service to anyone for making our staff uncomfortable or unsafe, and this was the driving force behind our decision, read an Instagram post from Metzger's Bar and Butchery, a German-influenced restaurant in the Union Hill neighborhood whose kitchen is helmed by co-owner Brittany Anderson and a veteran of TV cooking shows, including Top Chef and Chopped. Many of our staff are women and or members of the LGBTQ community. All of our staff are people with the rights who deserve dignity and safe work environment. We respect our staff's established rights as humans and strive to create a work environment where they can do their jobs with dignity, comfort, and safety. So, their argument is that by hosting this Christian group, the Family Foundation, by holding them, it's going to automatically create a unsafe work environment, that the people are going to be robbed of their dignity while working. Look, unless they're coming in and they're basically saying, hey, you know what, you're beneath me as a server. You're going to do what I tell you to do. You're not a human being. You're just a server, or you're just a cook. There's a problem here. Because the issue is not even about, are they really threatening the people? Are they going in there and threatening people? Are they going in and saying, I'm going to torch this place down? No. They're saying that they're completely uncomfortable, that they're really that they denied them simply because of who they are. Simply because of who they are. Let's say the group, the Family Foundation, was set to host a dessert reception for supporters on November 30th. The group's president, Victoria Cobb, wrote in a blog post describing the incident. About an hour and a half before it was slated to start, one of the restaurant's owners called to cancel it, she wrote. As our VP of Operations explained that guests were arriving at the restaurant shortly, she asked for an explanation, Cobb wrote. Sure enough, an employee looked up at our organization and their wait staff refused to serve us. What did they do? They did background check on them, basically. So, well, what is the group? Oh, the Family Foundation. Oh, what is that Family Foundation? So they decided to look them up and decide, you know what? Their views don't match our views. Their views don't match our views. Now, you can't discriminate against somebody for that, so what do? Well, it's an issue of dignity, comfort, and safety. One of the things that came out of the last couple of years, even when I go to like McDonald's or something, or any place, a fast food restaurant, I see now this page that's outside saying that we reserve the right to refuse service to anybody who's going to treat our staff with indignity, create a hostile environment, things like that. Now, typically what that's supposed to mean is if you're going to go in, start hollering, berating, and that kind of thing. Here it is simply because your political views don't line up with ours. We did a background check on you and we're not going to have you. Well, let's continue. The Family Foundation is based in Richmond and advocates for policies based on biblical principles. It is lobbied against same-sex marriage and abortion rights. Or in other words, when they say abortion rights, it means the right to life. They go for the rights of the unborn. That's what they're going for. That's what it actually is. It's like, we want the rights for the unborn. We want the unborn to see the light of day. And they're saying, no, we don't accept that. In an interview, Cobb said that since she posted about it, she has heard from people alarmed by the story and from other dining establishments, making it clear they would be welcome. A lot of people are outraged that a restaurant wants to make a litmus test at the door, she said. Everybody should be concerned that people are being denied services based on their politics. That's what others are saying, and I agree. Typically, if you want to, you can talk about religious standards, but it also comes down to politics. And this is a problem with the states, and I agree with people who have this problem, that they've intermingled the church and Christianity with politics. They have. They've become so intertwined that if you go to the States and you were to say, well, I'm a Christian, you're automatically linked with Republic. So you say, oh, you voted for Trump. Look, I'm a Christian. I don't like Trump at all. And I remember having youth ask me one time a couple of years ago when they were the election between Biden and Trump, like, do you vote for Biden? Would you vote for Biden or Trump? And I honestly said, look, first of all, I'm not American, so I'm not going to vote anyway. I said, two, I generally don't discuss politics in any way, shape, or form, unless it's something that the laws are going on, that kind of thing. I said, thirdly of all, I said, there are policies of Trump's I like, there are policies I don't like. There are policies of Biden I like, there are policies of Biden's I don't like. And I said, I'll leave it at that. But here it became the litmus test by politicals. They mingled the idea of Christian politics. So this one, that says their policies based on biblical principles, which means they hold that marriage is between a man and a woman, and they hold that it's of the right to life, that abortion is wrong, it should be avoided at all costs. They're saying, well, it's politics, and you're denying them based on politics. It says, in her blog post, Cobb likened the restaurant's move to establishments that refused to serve black customers in the 1950s and 60s, and she declared what she calls a double standard by liberals who think a Colorado baker should not be allowed to refuse to make a wedding cake for a same-sex couple. So that was Cobb making that equate. Now, the Washington Post look up some legal experts. Now, this is where I also want to go. Here's what's fascinating about this. Legal experts say neither of those are apt analogies. While it's illegal to discriminate against someone because of their race or religion, the restaurant refusal had to do with the group's actions, said Elizabeth Sepper, a professor at the University of Texas. It's about the overall position and policies that the group has taken. It's not about Christian versus non-Christian, she said. She said, according to the American Civil Liberties Union, D.C. Settle and Virginia Islands specifically protect people from being refused service because of their political affiliation or ideology. I'm going to disagree with that. This legal expert is playing a fine line, but actually it is. And here's why. Because it said it's not about the overall, it's about overall positions and policies that the group has taken. So can you do this with individuals? What I mean by that, let's say a Christian goes into a restaurant. Let's say if I were to go into a restaurant and say, we're just celebrating my wife's birthday, my wife and I and my kids, we want to come in. And we would like to come in. And I make a reservation. And the first thing they do is they look up my social media status. Now, you're not going to find a whole lot of my social media status. You're going to find two things. Most of all, occasionally you'll find a random post. But mostly you're going to find two things. You're going to find sermons that I've taught, and you're going to find my podcast. That's what you're going to find. And you're going to find that I am very much, just like this group, I am very much pro-marriage God's way, and I am against abortion. Does that mean that every restaurant now can say, I'm not going to serve you because we're an inclusive place, and you're making our staff feel uncomfortable? That's what you're. You're making our staff uncomfortable. Why? Well, they're not all LGBTQ, but we have a lot of women here. A lot of our servers are women, so we're not going to serve you because you create a hostile environment simply by being here. That's what's happening. So what is really happening is that, yes, it is. It is about Christian versus non-Christian, whether they like it or not. They really have. Now let's pull this up. It says, reached by phone, Metzer co-owner Kjell Anderson said the owners had no comment beyond the Instagram post. Well, I'm surprised. Not surprised. Because if they say any more, they really get themselves in trouble. Restaurants have made news for taking issues with their patrons' politics. Sarah Saunders, then the White House press secretary and now the governor-elect of Arkansas, was asked to leave the Red Hen in Lexington, Virginia in 2018. The owner of the restaurant, Stephanie Wilkerson, wrote that she thought Sanders was a person whose actions in the service of our country we felt violated basic standards of humanity. And a judge in 2018 sided with the New York bar that ejected a customer for wearing a Make America Great Again hat in support of Donald Trump. Do you see what the problem has happened? Because of the way that has happened, to follow Christian principles has now become equated with being conservative or Republican, whether you are or not. If you hold to Christian principles, they've linked it together. Therefore, it's a political association. So what have they done? They've replayed the definition of what it means to be a Christian. And they've made, as I said, a Christian synonymous with conservatism. Let me redefine that. What they classify as right-wing extreme conservatism. That's what has happened. And what is being done here is, unless you're going to back off of your stances, unless you're going to back off of LGBTQ issues, unless you're going to back off on abortion issues, unless you're going to back off on whatever political issues that they want, what they've set up now is they can say, we're not going to serve you. They'll say it's got nothing to do with religion, it's got nothing to do with ideology or anything else. It's got to do with politics. It's got to do with your stance. It's going to have to do with exactly who you are. And it's starting to spread. And yeah, there's the double standard that they just absolutely want to ignore. The double standard of saying, hey, this business over here that's a Christian business, they can't refuse service to anybody or a specific service to somebody based on a religious principle. But on the other side, we're just not going to call it a religious principle. We're going to call it a political. We're going to call it a political stance, and we're going to deny it. This is the problem. And here's what's going to happen. As we continue to walk with Christ, as we continue to stand by him, and the world goes off on its way, and this is exactly what was told to happen, as the world continues to fall into depravity, as they continue to fulfill Romans 1, as they continue to fill up the cup of God's wrath, the believers who seek to walk with Christ are going to be at odds with them. And what you're seeing here is something that's been warned about. Basically, you can call it the social credit score. It's in China, but it's coming here in a slightly different fashion. And this is across all North America. It's not going to come in about, oh, are you doing the government's extremism and yada, yada, yada. It's going to be about, are you okay with our litmus test of the LGBTQ? Are you okay with abortion? If you're not, then you're not going to be welcome here. You're not going to be able to attend this event. You're not going to be able to go to this restaurant. And it's really going to come down to the idea of biblical standards. And then we have to ask the question, are we willing to pay the price? Are we willing to count it? Are we willing to follow Jesus in all of this? Or are we going to back off? Are we going to surrender? So the question again from the very first one is, who are we following? Are we following the world and going to go within? Are we following the TikToks? Are we following the social media? Or are we going to follow Christ? In the end, I'll tell you this, if you go along with the world, it'll never be enough. The foundation will keep moving, and you'll have to keep trying to reset up. But when you stand on the foundation of Christ, then it's a solid foundation. And in the end, one will bring life and the other won't. It's only when we're in Christ that we have life. That's where we've got to understand. All right, we're going to take our break there. I didn't get to the third story, but if you're actually interested in it, the third story was about Kirk Cameron and how he was denied a reading time at the local libraries, and the local library said, you don't fit our definition, because he had a book that was based on family values and biblical censors that he wanted to read for children, but they will allow the drag queen story hour. So you can look that up. He was denied a time slot based on Christian values. But so come on back after the break, because we're going to continue to look at this issue of following Christ, the price of following Jesus. So come on back after the break as we continuing on asking the question, who are we following?
On behalf of the team at Creation Ministries International, thank you for your first-time visit to creation.com. Creation or evolution? Design or time and chance? It's a foundational question that affects every human being. And that's because what you believe about where we came from affects your ideas about the meaning of life, how you live it, and where you're headed. You see, what you believe about where you came from also shapes your view on whether there's an eternity or not. If we are the result of meaningless chance, then we simply return to nothing when we die. But if there is a Creator God, the Bible tells us that He has done something about the fact we will all eventually die. But can the Bible be trusted in an age of science? We pose three big questions and hope that you can see that the answers to questions 2 and 3 depend upon what you believe about the first one. Creation.com represents over 30 years of research by many scientists and specialists, and here you will find articles and media presentations on this hot button topic, the creation versus evolution debate. Best of all, it's all free. Many have questions like, what about dinosaurs in the Bible? Could God have used evolution? Is there life on other planets? And why would a loving God allow suffering and death? We've endeavored to answer these and hundreds more. So please enjoy creation.com.
All right, welcome back to our episode here. Now you may be wondering, why do I keep playing the creation.com in this season? Why do I advertise them? And the reason being is because one of the problems that has arisen is a lot of the arguments against why people don't want to follow Christ. And I read quite a bit of them as I do another series called I Object. That one's all video. There is a lot of it comes from a lack of information. And a lot of times there are things like them saying, well, science doesn't back it up, or there's too much evidence for evolution and things like that. And creation.com actually shows the scientific basis of the scriptural account of creation. And it actually answers all those science things. So I encourage you to check that out when you got some time. There's something like 14,000 articles on there by PhD scientist levels and things like that if you need to argue from authority. That's why I kind of do, because I think it's a great resource you can look up and you can do. There's stuff there for kids as well. So I encourage you to check that out. All right, let's get into the second half of our show today, our episode today. We're building on the theme of following Jesus. Now, one of the things that I want to look at, and I really want to unpack here in this second half, is really all about the cost of following Jesus. How are we really willing to count the cost? As we saw there before the break, I just gave an example of a restaurant refusing a Christian organization. And getting away with it, specifically because they're saying, well, it's not religious, it's political ideologies, that kind of thing. And then, as I said, we didn't get to the other article, but Kirk Cameron being refused to sign up for a story hour because they said it didn't line up with their views. Keep in mind, these are the same libraries and things that will hold drag story hour and LGBTQ stuff and things like that. There is a cost of following Christ, and I wonder, are we actually willing to endure it? Because I think we've had it, I'm going to say in North America, we've had it probably a little easy. Like most of the idea of persecution, and even in my own life, what have I actually faced? The most I've faced is I've faced a couple of name callings being made fun of, and I'm like, that didn't bother me any. I faced a couple of threats of physical harm, which I just shook off and continued my way, and one, I ended up losing a job because of it, and ultimately said that I was removed from their location simply because they said they didn't like what I was teaching, and the other rule wasn't because I couldn't be controlled. That's what was honestly researched out. Somebody who looked into it, and that's what it really came down to. They just didn't like what was being taught. And I don't really teach any differently. In fact, in the end, I've just become more emboldened in it, to be honest with you, because in the time off, I spent time actually doing more research, more writing, and that kind of thing. But as I said, I think we've had it kind of a little too easy here. And by that, I mean we've had it pretty cushiony. And I think the tide is changing, where to hold Christian values is actually going to put us out there even more if we stand firm on them. And I mean actually stand firm on them. And I think that's one of the things about following Jesus is we've also almost developed it into this idea of easy believism. And what I mean by that is like, oh, you said a prayer when you're 3, now you can do whatever you want, kind of thing. Or think, oh, I just go to church and that's it, as long as I attend church. And what are you doing at church? You may listen, you may not. I know plenty of people, you see a lot from the stage, where people are on their phones, on social media. I remember sitting in an audience one time, and every time the pastor would go up to speak, I'd watch the guy in front of me. He would just turn and just stare out the window. That's what he did the entire time. And then when it was over, he'd look back and then continue on. And I think that's where we've almost developed this easy believism. And so this challenge is for all of us really a bit, have we counted the cost? And in fact, if we really followed Jesus and we listen to what Jesus said, Jesus never once said that following him would be easy. He never once said that, you know what, following me and everything's going to be hunky-dory. A lot of times it's the exact opposite. Where you've got to give up. Jesus calls us to give up everything. He really does. And I want to see where this actually plays out. So we're gonna go to the scriptures. We're gonna go to the Bible because, as I said, building on the foundation of the Word of God is vitally important. Today we're gonna go to the Gospel that Luke has written down, or the good news that Luke has written down. We're gonna visit a couple places. We're gonna go to Luke 14 first. Luke 14 is where we're gonna go. And Jesus is teaching the crowd. And here's what he says. He says, now great multitudes went with him. And he turned and said to them, now, why were the crowds following Jesus? Let's ask the question. Why were the crowds following Jesus? The crowds were following Jesus because they had seen the miracles. That's why. Probably a lot of them had actually experienced the miracles, or knew somebody who had experienced a miracle, who had been healed, who eyes had been opened. They're probably there of the crowd who's probably eaten of the food that Jesus provided. And they heard him teach. They liked the stories. And so they wanted to get more of it. They wanted more of the worship experience, we'll kind of say. That's what they wanted. They wanted more of the Jesus experience. That's what they wanted. They wanted the Jesus experience. They wanted the stories. They wanted to see the miracles. They wanted the Jesus experience so they could go home and tell us, yeah, I got the Jesus experience. So this great multitude is following Jesus. And then Jesus turns to them, and he says something that's most peculiar. He says, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother, wife and children, brother and sisters, yes, his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. All right, stop right there. Hold on a second. I thought God was a God of love. What is Jesus telling me to hate people? Wait a minute. Not only that, isn't this contradictory? Isn't Jesus being contradictory here? You got the 10 commandments. You shall have no other gods before me. Number 1. Number 2, you shall make for yourself no graven images. Number 3, you shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. Number 4, remember the Sabbath day. Keep it holy. Number 5, honor your father and mother. Wait a minute. Commandment number 5, honor your father and mother. What did Jesus just say here? You got to hate your father and mother. Huh. Did Jesus just be contradictory there? Did Jesus just contradict the Old Testament? Well, we know that's not true. That can't be true because Jesus said, I did not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. So what is he talking about? This is what we call a hyperbolic language. Hyperbolic language. He's using hyperbole. He's talking about the fact that you've got to have Jesus first in your comparison For your love for Christ, everything else should be so secondary, should be so far behind, that it almost gets equated with hate. And you go, well, that still sounds really rough, but we have to understand this. When Jesus talked about the first and second commandment, what did he talk about? He said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. He says, and the second's like it, love your neighbor as yourself. But the question comes, where do we get the love to be able to show our neighbor? It comes from God. It comes from him. And so the question there is about the idea of hating his father and mother, his wife, his children, his brother, his sisters, yes, his own life. It comes with the fact that, are we really willing to stop and count the cost? He used this hyperbolic language simply to get people to stand up and pay attention. He meant to be a little offensive there. He meant to get them to go, wait, whoa, what did you just say? What did you say? You can't say that, Jesus. But he's saying that's the way it is. And because a lot of times what happens here is he's making the reference here is that instead of following Jesus, they follow other things. I said, growing up in a Christian environment, I think that we, as I said, we don't fully understand this. If you grew up in a Christian knowledge, a Christian place, or a place where Christianity's become cultural, I think we can lose what this means. But I want you to imagine the idea of growing up in a strict Muslim household. And I mean a strict Muslim household. Where the father is the patriarch of the household. What he says goes. You follow the house. You do not bring shame to your parents. You do bring shame to your father or anything. And as a child or as a person in that household, you're trying to decide to follow Jesus. And you're going to run into this problem here, where if you follow Jesus and you say, I am a Christian, that the patriarch of the family, and this happens, will almost force you to denounce Christ. Will force you to almost to denounce him. Or there are consequences. And some of those are very, very, very strict. And I mean, if you're in a strict Muslim household here, to leave Islam, it means to disrespect your father. It means they'll equate it as hating your father. And they can drag you before the others and they can have you killed in a religious killing, in an actual killing. They think that's doing the good thing. They sacrifice their own child to this. This is what it's talking about. And in the Jewish culture, that could happen as well. Not to that extreme. But they were being thrown out of the synagogue. They were being thrown out of the family life. They're being thrown out of the community life because they chose to acknowledge Jesus. This is what Jesus is talking about. As I said, I think we've had it so easy here that this type of idea that we're not really choosing between our culture and our family and Jesus. We're saying, yeah, I can follow Jesus, and our family's going, yeah, that's fine. Do whatever you want. Whatever. Our culture, for the most part, is still saying, yeah, whatever. You just keep your religion private. Now, that, as I've shown, that's starting to change. But this is what Jesus is talking about. He's talking about really sitting down and counseling and counting the cost, even to the point of your own life. And then he drives that home. He's like, what does it mean to hate my own life? What do you mean hate my own life? He says, whoever does not bear his cross and come after me. And I got to ask that question, like that means something a little different for us nowadays. But I said, but they would understand what that meant. Would they understand? Absolutely understand that meant. They were growing up under the Roman regime. They lived under the Roman regime where the threat of crucifixion was always there. If they were a rebel, if they broke certain laws, they could be crucified. And it was a horrific death. So Jesus is driving home. What does it mean to hate your own life? It means not even be willing to put me ahead of yourself. That's what he's saying. And we see this. You can go back and you can read books from, I think, like the late 90s, early 2000s, called Jesus Freak Volume 1, Jesus Freak Volume 2. And those are stories of martyrs who refused to deny Christ, who willingly went to death rather than deny Christ. This is what was happening. This is what Jesus is referring to. They would understand this. But it's to count the cost. It's to stop saying, I'm going to count the cost of actually following Jesus. Is it, this can't be what he really means. Is Jesus really saying about this? See, one of the problems is I think when I say we developed easy believism, and the problem is there's good things that come from it, but there's also false things that come from it, was the idea of the altar call and the sinner's prayer. The altar's call is, I would say, is better than just the idea of the sinner's prayer. But the sinner's prayer, for the most part, what the design was, is just repeat this prayer after me. Or you run into that, like Rick Warren had it, or others have had it, and you just repeat this prayer after me. And the idea of the sinner's prayer, what does it do? Say, well, if you said that prayer, like Rick Warren's like, I want to welcome you to God's family. Well, actually, Rick Warren in his book Purpose Driven Life didn't even use the sinner's prayer. It's just like, God, I believe in you. Which is the idea there, because that is belief in Christ. But the idea that you just said that prayer, you're good to go, or you heard it after some like emotional saying, emotional time, whatever, and you give in the idea of emotionalism there, and you run into that problem, and you say, well, I said that prayer, but in the actual idea here is Jesus saying, no, I want you to sit down, I want you to count the cost. This is actually going to be costly. It's going to cost you here in this world. It's going to cost you here in this life. And I think, as I said, we've grown up in this culture where we don't count the cost. We don't. We just say, well, I said the prayer and I did that. And we think that the hardships of being a Christian is just dealing with life's actual problems. And what I mean like the curse of sin, dealing with sickness, dealing with sin around us, and dealing with our own sin and our own failings. We think that's what it means to be a Christian, just dealing with that kind of stuff. But what Jesus is actually talking about is like, are you willing to actually stand against the culture? Are you willing to stand against those actual injustices? I don't mean the world's definitions of injustices, which says, oh, you've got to accept things that God's against. I mean actually stand against the real injustices when the world is going against the things of God. This is what Jesus is saying. I remember back in my camping days, in 1 week. Now, my call in camping wasn't a lot of times to lead people to Christ. No, it was more to help develop disciples. And what do I mean by that? And you can kind of see this, because what actually would take place is that when cabins were divvied up, almost every week that I was a cabin leader in it, everybody in my cabin had already decided to follow Christ in this aspect. We'll use that language. In other words, they were all Christians for the most part. In other words, you don't lead them to salvation twice. So you don't evangelize them twice, kind of thing. So, except in this 1 week, I actually did. It wound up that of the 10 boys that I had in the cabin, only one of them was actually a believer, and I knew because I had him the year before. But I'll say the Spirit moved this week, and by the end of the week, 8 of those 9 came to faith. But I remember the last one, and there's a question that I always ask when somebody says, "I want to follow Christ." I ask why. I always ask why, and that does a couple of things. One, that helps me to know: do they understand the decision they're making? Do they understand what it's about? Do they actually know what the gospel is? Or are they just saying, I just want to follow Jesus because he's going to make my life easier? And one of the worst ones I heard, and this wasn't, for me, this was my time behind the pulpit as well. You said, yeah, I accept Christ this week. I said, great. And he asked, like, yeah, well, I've had a hard life. And he did. He said, and I've tried everything else, so I thought I'd give Jesus a try. And I'm like, oh, that's a shame. And he learned that at camp. One of these others that I was thinking of, that I was actually thinking of, back to my original story there, where a lot of them come out, and I had to kick them out. I asked him that question, why? He said, well, because everybody else is doing it. And I said, no, I can't do it. They go, how could you do it? What? One, he didn't really understand. Two, he didn't really want to do it. He was just following the crowd, rather than making a decision for himself. One of the best ones I ever had, I'll give you the exact opposite of this, is I had a process on usually the second to last night. I would fully tell the gospel story. I'd tell the story of Jesus from start to finish. Took about an hour and a half, while the kids are ready for bed, and they're listening. Some fall asleep, some don't. And one kid afterwards, after I finished telling the story, he walks up to me and he goes, "It's like, I want to make a decision to follow Jesus. He said, but I'm too tired right now to think it through. Can we talk in the morning? And I said, sure. And I was like, that's amazing. Sure enough, after breakfast the next morning, the kid comes to me and I said, okay, can I ask you why? Why now? And he says, well, I've heard the story of Jesus my entire life. He says, but I never heard it quite that way. Now I understand it. I was like, all right. He stopped and took the time to think about it. He didn't make this idea of just an offhanded decision. He actually stopped and thought about it. And this is actually what Jesus is telling. Let's continue in this passage here. He says, for which of you, intending to build a tower, does not sit down first and count the cost, whether he is enough to finish it, lest after he laid the foundation and is not able to finish it, and all who see it begin to mock him. This happens a lot in the Christian faith. They make a quick decision, and then their life goes off tracks. Their life goes completely opposite. Say, look, see, Christians are horrible. And they become the laughingstock. Then he says, again, saying, this man began to build and not able to finish. He says, or what king going to war against another king does not sit down first and consider whether he is able to win with 10,000 to meet him who comes against him with 20,000. Or else, while the other is still a great way off, he sends a delegation and asks conditions of peace. You say, well, those are great stories, but here's the punchline. He says, so likewise, whoever does not forsake all that he has cannot be my disciple. In other words, Jesus is telling them to sit down and actually think. To think about this. To think about the cost. Yes, the reward is greater. It is. But what does he have? He's got this huge multitude that is following him, that wants the Jesus experience, but they don't really want to be disciples. Jesus is telling them, I want you to stop and count the cost of all this. Because I want you to realize that it can actually cost you everything. It can cost you your family. It can cost you your friendships. It can cost you your employment. It can cost you, even at the extreme, it can cost you your life. That's what it can actually cost you. But are we willing to that? Are we willing to that? I want to go down to the next passage here a little bit that I have for a little bit later in Luke 18. Now, this is after the rich young ruler. And he says, and when Jesus saw that he became very sorrowful, he said, that's the rich young ruler. Jesus said, one thing you lack, sell everything you have to the poor, then come and follow me. The man became very sorrowful and went away. And Jesus saw that he was sorrowful. He said, how hard it is for those who have riches to enter the kingdom of God. For it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. Now, I want to explain that passage just for a second before I continue on here. He said, well, what does that mean? Why is it so hard for a rich person to enter the kingdom of God? Is it because the rich can't be saved? Is it because of their love of money? The love of money is part of it. It is, but it's not all of it. They had the belief system, and you can see this in the book of Job as well. And this is a belief system that very much exists today. This is why you see things like Joel Osteen, Joyce Meyer, Creflo Dollar, Kenneth Copeland, the whole Kenneth Hagin, the whole health and wealth gospel. Is this idea that if you follow God, you're going to be blessed. And part of that blessing is, as they preach, with riches, with wealth, with money, with material possessions, with health. And so the reverse also seems to be true here. And I don't mean the reverse of that statement saying, oh, if you're doing horrible and you're sick and you're all that, then you must have sinned. But and what they were doing is they were judging by whether somebody was of God based on their material possessions, on their material blessings. And so the rich person, seeing a rich person in their society who claims to be a follower of God, having all this, they say, oh, he must be. Well, look at the blessing he has. And the hardest thing is, one is the love of money, but two is for them to stop and to realize, you know what? Maybe all this riches has nothing to do with me being a follower of Christ. Maybe, in fact, it's a stumbling block. That's why it can be so hard. Because to acknowledge that, you know what? Maybe I'm not good enough. And maybe it has nothing to do with all this material possessions I have. So that's the problem. And so once you understand that makes the next question they ask, when those who heard it said, who then can be saved? Because they equated the fact that they had material possessions meant that they were already blessed of God. And Jesus is saying that's not true. Or it's not necessarily true. Sometimes it happens. Sometimes you do get an Abraham or a Job. But Job's an important piece of wisdom literature because it actually challenges that idea. That if I'm good, I get riches, and if I'm suffering, well, that's because I sinned. And that was the whole argument of the book of Job. And they ran into it. So I encourage you to read the book of Job again, the discussion with the friends, and see how they come against Job in this way. All right? And so they're having this problem. But Jesus says, you know what? It is, with God, it's impossible. With man, it's impossible. With God, those things which are impossible with men are possible with God. Let me read the verse rather than try to quote it here, because I'm getting myself confused and tongue-tied. So it's like you'll lose it's like it's impossible with men. It's impossible for anybody to be saved with men. But with God, all things are possible. Salvation is always possible with God, even for the rich, even for those who have struggled along the way. But then Peter comes back and says, look, we have left all to follow you. And Peter says, we've given it all up. We've done that, Jesus. So are we blessed or are we not? That's kind of what he's asking. And so Jesus said, assuredly I say to you, there is no one who has left house or parents or brothers or wife or children for the sake of the kingdom of God and the kingdom will fail to receive just as much of this life, blessing of this life or the next. That's what he's talking about. So the blessings that you receive are not physical. They're spiritual, and they will be in the life to come. There'll be the blessings there as well. And I want us to understand something about these disciples who follow Jesus. It's like counting the cost. Counting the cost. I want to just a second. For some, it's just kind of an interesting piece of tidbit, but I want to drive it home. This really shoots down the idea that material possessions, long life, and that kind of blessing, it means is all entirely following Christ. No, to stop and actually count the cost of following Christ. And here's from the disciples. Here's how all of them ended their life. Both Peter and Paul were both martyred under the time of Emperor Nero around 66 AD. They were both martyred. So you can go the apostle to the Gentiles, the apostle to the Jews. Both died in the year 66 under Emperor Nero. Peter was crucified upside down, and Paul was beheaded. Peter was crucified. They both left everything, but they counted the cost of Jesus worth it all. The Apostle Paul even makes that statement. He says, for the cross of Christ, I count everything but as rubbish for the sake of knowing Christ. That's what he said. To the point that even their own life, they did not even love their lives more than Christ. They loved Christ more than themselves. But let's continue. Andrew, he traveled around where he was crucified. He was also crucified. Thomas, he was pierced through by four spears, 4 soldiers. They pierced him through at the same time because of the witness of Jesus Christ. Philip, he got in trouble because while he was preaching, the wife of the Roman proconsul in Carthage, which is like North Africa and Asia Minor, converted to Christ. He led her to Christ, and because of that, the proconsul had Philip arrested and put to death because the guy's wife put her faith in Christ. Philip willingly laid down his life for that. Matthew, he was stabbed to death in Ethiopia during his time. Bartholomew. Now, Bartholomew's got a few different traditions, but the one that's most predominant is that Bartholomew was flayed. He had his skin flayed, is what it was, most likely. And yeah, it's pretty horrible. Then he was beheaded. It was a brutal, brutal death for Bartholomew. James, the son of Alphaeus, that's one of the 3 James in the New Testament. So you got 3 James. James, son of Alphaeus. James the Lesser is kind of his. James, the brother of John. And then James, the brother of the half-brother of Jesus, who's responsible for the book of James. James the Lesser, Josephus records him being stoned and then beaten to death with clubs. So they stoned him when he wasn't fully dead. They went and beat him the rest of the way to death with clubs for the cross of Christ. Simon the Zealot, he was murdered for refusing to bow down to the sun god. So yeah, by the sake of Christ, he said, "I would not deny Christ." Mattathias is the replacement for Judas. I read in the book of Acts. He was burned to death. Death by fire. So as you see, every single one of the disciples, except for John, who was believed to die of old age, but not for lack of trying. They did boil him in oil, and it didn't happen, and he didn't die, so they stuck him on an island. That tradition kind of said he did get off the island a little bit before he died. But the disciples, they didn't become wealthy. They didn't become rich. They weren't accepted by society. In fact, in the end, they were murdered. They died for the sake of Christ. They counted the cost. And so my question for us is, from the very beginning, one, who are we following? Are we following a Jesus of our own design? Are we following the world? Are we following whatever modern culture says? That's our first question. Because if we are, we're already on a bad foundation. We are. We're on a bad foundation. A foundation that's going to shift and sand, crack and break, and not going to be able to stand. And then the second question I ask is, have we really sat down and counted the cost of following Christ? Have we? Because this is what Jesus actually called us to do, to count. He says, look, as we read the story, he says, you don't build a tower without first figuring out, can you afford it? You don't build a building without looking, can I afford it? He says also, a king doesn't go to war unless he figures out, can I actually win this fight? He says, so it is with my disciples. If you want to be my true disciple, he's like, that's what you've got to do. Because I think one of the other problems is we've misunderstood the definition of disciple. The definition of a disciple is one who not just learns from, who walks with, who lives with, becomes like the teacher. That's what it means to be a disciple. And if Jesus told them flat out plenty of times, you can read in the upper room where he says, look, the world hated me, it's going to hate you. It's going to. If the world rejected me, it's going to reject you. And the question that we've got to ask is, are we willing to go through that? Have we actually stopped and counted the cost? This is what it means to build on that solid foundation of Jesus, to understand it, to grow in it, to be strengthened in it. The first thing we do is we got to count the cost, especially as we're now living in a culture that is contrary to the gospel of Jesus Christ, that is contrary to all things that are of him. And it's continuing to go that way. And we're going to see a culture that continues to develop a mentality that unless you accept what they accept, you're going to be excluded from the culture. And that's what we have to ask. Are we willing to follow Jesus even to that point? The book of Hebrews gives that, drives that home. Hebrews 11 and into 12. Hebrews 11 is the Hero's Hall of Faith. And when you read the last section of chapter 11 there, he talks about the martyrs. He talks about those who are persecuted. He talks about those who suffered for the gospel of Christ. And then he says, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off the sin that it so easily entangles us and set our eyes on Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the glory set before him endured the cross. That's what we've got to do. So let me leave you with that question again. How do you answer it? Am I counting the cost of following Christ? But Jesus said in the end, he tells you, I tell you that no one who left father or mother or home or business or anything will fail to receive even greater riches, because we have in Christ every spiritual blessing in the heavenly realm. Are you following Christ? Have we counted the cost of following Christ? And will we continue to walk with him, even in a world that's rejected him? All right, that's the end of our episode here today. Thanks for joining me for episode 11 of Who Are We Following? As always, if you have any questions, you want to talk, you want to discuss, continue, write into me, pastorstephenteed@gmail.com, or send me a message. And if you want to set up a more face-to-face, we can do that with the thanks with the help of technology, the thanks to it. So until next time, I pray that you will grow in the knowledge of Jesus Christ, that you will be strengthened in the faith, and that His grace will be upon you. So continue to build your life on that solid foundation of Jesus Christ.